souls. Oh, just in time for the recording. Perfect. Gonna start with me. Great. Yeah.
All right. So last time we talked about the sort of requirements a bunch, and I think we made some good decisions. I tried to capture it in the notes from last time. We talked about, or we said we'd talk about, start to talk about the API shape this time. Given some of the sort of surrounding constraints we talked about last time. So yeah, let me share the notes doc. All right, let's see. All right, so API shapes. So yeah, so some of the things that we talked about last time, just in terms of sort of framing this, were things like, if we have multiple objects that might match a particular image, we treat it as an and of those assorted policies, which lets us do things like have folks setting these things at different scope, like a platform operator versus sort of the individual teams setting their own policies, right? And not having those conflict and have precedence problems. Things like key rotation, I think we saw as sort of a requirement of the API that whatever shape we choose for representing keys should lend itself towards rotation. So for things like continuous checking, I think we sort of decided to punt on that and say that the API objects that we are looking at, maybe a suitable way of sort of programming continuous verification, but in the absence of sort of a standard mechanism for that, we should punt on it, at least for now. Jim brought up that there was some discussion about some policy objects in Kubernetes, or I guess policy CRDs in Kubernetes. I think they're called policy report, if I'm not mistaken, which might be something we should look at sort of as a follow-on to this, but for sort of an output to continuous verification. But that's something that I think we should circle back to in a bit. And let's see, am I missing other things skimming this? I tried to bold them, but there were a bunch of things that sort of will factor into sort of the discussion today. Let's see. So we bucketed some things in terms of things we thought were missing from both the CLI and webhook. And we talked about sort of auditing what you can currently do in the CLI a bit, and talked about sort of matching some of those capabilities, like specifying a full CO root, things like being able to redirect where signatures and attestations are pulled from, things like queue-based policies. I spent a little while yesterday playing around with that to see what the state of that was, and opened a couple issues because I think, and I think Jim saw those and was commenting on them. So I think that could use some work on both sides. But it's sort of a fun starting point. So yeah. So do we want to start by looking at the? Well, I guess I can stop presenting for this if someone wants to present the sort of the open PR and the API shape that's in there, and see sort of how close that gets us to some of this stuff. I don't know if Hector or Kavitha want to.
I think Kavitha would probably.
I
have
can
the
share it
PR
here.
up, yeah.
All right.
We'll be right back.
Can everybody see it?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Cool. So let me also, should I just open the issue maybe?
I would say, is there like a YAML snippet somewhere that sort of?
Yeah, this one. Can you see this?
Yes. Is that
Yeah,
grainy
so
for
this,
anyone else or just me?
Yeah, lots of compression artifacts, but mostly readable.
hmm. Is it my Wi-Fi maybe? I'm not sure because I'm sitting in a room that's like away from the router.
Maybe bump up the size a little bit.
It's full screen, so I don't know what I can.
I mean the text size, if you can.
Oh, cool. Does it make sense?
A little better. Yeah.
Example of a policy. All right.
Hey, sweet. There we go. Good for the over 40 crowd.
Just you maybe.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So yeah, so we proposed this this CRD, which will differentiate the container images based on patterns, and for each pattern, you can specify what keys need to be used to verify that signature of that image. And right now, the implementation works with whatever Cosigned does now, which is if one of the key verifies any one of the signature, it's good to go.
Kavitha, if you scroll a little bit down, there is a more recent YAML or list proposal, which is applying what we more or less have now.
Yeah, the thing is we have not included this in the PR. For now, it has only these two. We didn't do anything with exploding resources. Right now, it's still working on namespaces being labeled with cosigned true or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess if we agree that this is how we're going to start differentiating or differentiating images to map certain properties to, we can start from here. So is it going to be a name pattern, like or a pattern to separate images?
So Kavitha, yeah, the pattern, I think there was a question, is this just a glob match or is it regex or what are we, how are we matching?
Yeah, I think this was a glob match.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it supports like star and
Yeah, and
question
star
mark
star.
or?
We have not verified with question mark, but I guess the library glob was does give the ability to do those.
Yeah, it's still supported, right? We use a standard library for that.
Yes.
What are the keys here? Oh, I see.
So
I see. Okay.
the public
reference is
keys
up above. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So from our document, like the solution set that we are talking about, we would need to be able to specify cosigned repository, to specify full CO routes. I'm just looking at the ones that we do currently have in CLI, but not in the webhook. So if we start there, then we could specify full SEO root and cosigned repository for each of those patterns, which I would assume go as references. Would that make sense?
Sorry, I'm not sure I completely follow.
So just like how we are specifying a pattern here and keys, which is a reference to the key that you have specified in the same CRD but above, we can specify the full SEO root and cosigned repository, which is, I think, in our document as currently we do have in CLI, but not in webhook. We can do the same thing here, saying that, hey, there is a list of full SEO roots and a list of cosigned repositories. And then we map it saying that for this image pattern, we use this cosigned repository and this full SEO root and these set of keys.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of this and all of that. Yeah, so we need to have a way of sort of specifying the keys, the cosigned repository, the possibly the full SEO root. There's also you can say on verify attestation, there's also the policy flag, which is where some of the Rego and Q stuff comes in. But yeah, I think that's, Jake, you've been doing the most spelunking in the verification path recently. Does anything else sort of pop out to you that we might be missing? Oh, did Jake? Oh.
What do you mean by do you mean the and or?
So I was playing with this yesterday. So if you say in cosign verify attestation, there was something added where you can say, in addition to specifying the key that is used to verify the signature on the attestation, you can pass a little blob of Rego and Q that the in toto statement is fed through to do some extended validation. I opened a couple issues on this. I know Jim saw them. Let me.
Yeah.
They should be like at the top of the cosigned repo.
To answer your question, there's like there's a few, you know, don't verify or don't cache the tough root, don't verify timestamps, that sort of thing. There's little flags here and there that we might want to get rid of some. We might want to just say like, oh, always don't care about updating the local tough root, that sort of thing. But yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
couple of quick things. So Matt, on the policy, like the Rego or Q or any other kind of structure we want to support, I'm kind of seeing that as a few layers up, you know, where if, you know, as we look at the verify function itself, again, if we move, and I know there's other issues filed on this, if we move to a more pluggable verifier kind of model, then an upper layer could apply and, you know, kind of take the data returned from the verify function and, you know, pass that through Rego or Q or whatever is required. So that was one thing and we can kind of maybe tease that apart a little bit more and see what falls where. But for the layer itself, I guess that's passed into the cosigned verify today, which is mostly what the structure would translate into the options we're setting. I think there's a few things we've, you know, kind of over time added in. So the roots we mentioned, there's also things like subject and issuer. There's the annotations. So let me actually, I can link to, I'll put this in chat. The struct we are using, which is fairly similar to this, which has all of those types currently in the Kyverno rules.
I'm going to stick that in the notes.
Yeah, so this again, the image is what is the name pattern here. Kyverno uses a different library currently, but that's a minor thing. It doesn't really matter, right? It supports just the star and question mark for patterns, and then so I think the library is it's called Wildcard. I think it was initially by Minio, and now it's supported in a few other places. But yeah, the structure is just the name pattern, which is called image here, the key, which is a single key today, and then, or actually, I take that back. There was, I'll have to check where that moved to, but there's a way to pass also multiple keys in there. There's roots, which is for keyless, subject and issuer, which is matched. If for keyless, again, annotations, which is if annotations are passed at the command line. The repo, which is if you want to pass an alternate signature registry, and attestations, which is if there are signed attestations returned and you want to do some policy matching on that, right? So like based on any expression or again, a higher level language.
It looks quite complete. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're sort of based on conversations with Dan in the past, I think where Q sort of came in is instead of trying to necessarily capture sort of matching all of the different things in terms of YAML, basically passing it as a sort of structured blob so that folks could, write the ands and the ors and whatnot in terms of something like a Q or a rego. But I don't want to speak too much for him on that. That's just...
Yeah. Anecdotally, I've always found Q to be super unfriendly.
I agree. I agree.
It's so easy to screw up and like not know like it's rough.
So one thought, right? So I mean, so there will be several ways of doing the matches and how we want to apply policy languages, right? Whether Q, Rego, or something else. But if you're looking at today, I mean, with Cosigned, it allows us to pass in a single key or a single signature or single something which we use for the verification, right? So instead of doing that, is there a way we can add one layer of abstraction, which could then become like a Q-based verifier or a Rego-based verifier or just any composite verifier structure that we want to support? But it's really passed in. So today, I think I was just looking at this earlier. If you look in the cosigned verified, the check ops argument, we're passing in signature verifier, right? And it's a single signature verifier. But can't that be a more kind of complex or composite, some abstraction where we can then vary whether the upper layer, the callee, is applying Q or Rego or whatever they wish, right? But it's then up to them to pass in that pluggable verifier.
So you're saying in this world that the signature verifier itself would verify more than signature.
Yes.
It would basically do it. I think that's the direction that we're sort of pushing a bit with some of the current refactoring around verification.
So like at the very least, it verifies the signature and then also verifies like the full assert and the record.
Right. So there could be a default verifier. Maybe there's some minimal set that Cosigned itself does because it has to be done, right? But then maybe there's a way to then pass in like a multi-verifier or a composite verifier, whatever we want. And if these are just, and it could be and or it could be operations defined in there, which applies its logic, right? So then that abstraction handles whether the end result is a yes or no, allow or deny. But cosine, the verify function itself is not determining then.
Then how can the user, like, what do you see the way in which the user will say, hey, I need these many verifiers?
Right. Yeah. So it could be then the CLI would support Q or Rego policies like it does today, right? So and you could translate those to that Q verifier. So really, then the job of the Q verifier is to take that the set of signed attestations or signed, OCI references returned, and then apply the Q policy to it and say, yes, I'm going to allow this or not. If you're doing it with Rego, similarly, you could make that determination using Rego. If we come up like in Kyverno, we're using JamesPath and other expressions. So we would, handle that at that layer and say, yes, we want to allow based on the user-defined policy. And, in this TRD, you could define some YAML, or if you want to take a blob of Q, or however you wish, right?
This pattern sounds familiar to what Connoisseur does, right? Connoisseur does verificators, and you define verificators, and then you can use one or many when you are applying a policy. So probably looking at the Connoisseurs just give us an idea as to that, or you are applying just simply to throw one Rego row example over there on the YAML and then use that or Q.
Yeah. Well, I think also, do we want to be pushing like a Turing complete policy language? Do we need that? Do we want that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think like if we don't care, then we don't need to be, we can just have like something real and structured.
Right.
I'm afraid of having a 100 lines YAML file with all R's and ands and everything. That I am afraid of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's
Yeah.
a solution for now.
Yeah. It's like I'm thinking the alternative is basically like, building up a syntax tree in YAML.
Yeah.
Everyone loves YAML. Yeah.
Oh, we're stuck with it. So
Definitely more than Rego, though.
The trigger. I mean, I bet this has appeared on SIG policy, right? Many other times in conversations and.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Sure. So would it be helpful to sort of do this a bit more interactively? And so I copied the YAML that's on the screen right now into the doc.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be helpful to sort of more interactively sort of futz around with it in the notes doc, since I think we can all edit it. But I will. Oops. I will share this window. Let's see. All right. So we need to figure out some of the scoping stuff, and this isn't in the current PR. So let's sort of come back to this. We'll whittle this down and then sort of build it back up. There's also sort of cluster scope versus namespace scope, which I think we can sort of punt on for now. I'm also going to nitpick and reorganize, right? So, okay, so first thing we do is we sort of match an image. I think we're all sort of cool with the idea of having the different policies use some sort of glob-based scheme here, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to do that. So let's see. So then referencing things in terms of keys, Yeah, so I've been sort of toiling about this a little bit, and sort of distinction between sort of literal keys and sort of what you really want to identify with, you know, like keyless style things. So the way I've been sort of reasoning about it in my head, and I don't know if this will sort of resonate with folks, is in terms of sort of identities. Where, you know, if I am presenting a sort of public key here, right, whoever holds that private key, it may not have a name per se, but that identity that signs with that private key is really who I'm sort of saying here, right? Whereas in the keyless world, right, like we're verifying against a sort of root, but it's really the identity that was verified by that root. That's what's I think important to verify. So less the key of the Fulcio root and more the sort of identity of whoever was sort of linked into that chain. Yeah, anyway, so I wonder about the term sort of key here, sort of prescribing us to the sort of more, or orienting more around the sort of key-based path as opposed to the sort of more, I don't know, identity.
Yes. So you wanna
We should definitely support it.
So you want to
Sorry, go ahead,
normalize
Lisa.
it in terms of like how you do for a database and pull the identity out of the policy and say that, oh, this pattern needs to be verified by this identity, like saying that that identity can have different things, like it can look at a key, it can look at a different KMS, it can look at different Fulcio roots, so stuff like that.
Well, so I guess what I'm wondering about is, so in this case, right, where I have a public key that I'm verifying, right, there's a private key holder, and that's like a specific person who can sign these things. And like this, I think, is sort of a legit policy, because, you know, I'll only let things through that were signed by that specific identity. With keyless, against the public root, for sure, anyone can sign against it, right? We you know, are an all opportunities signer, but like what's really important for verification is, I mean, you obviously need to verify against the root, but when you're assessing sort of what things to let through, it becomes more of a sort of question of the identity you're letting through, right? So I guess the question I pose is, how would we want to write a policy for the keyless case? So like this makes sense to me for the sort of key full case, but let's do one for keyless, so we can sort of.
I think that's still an open question, basically, because right now the only thing beyond just like pinning support for public keys is asserting, and like they aren't mutually exclusive, but like the only alternative is asserting like the email of the OIDC identity as an email. It's not even like, you know, the more interesting fields in the subject of the cert. It's literally just the email. And so like there's known issues with that too. It's like, you know, who, like an email can be shared between multiple identity providers, right? So it's like, you know, how do we distinguish between like @gmail.com with Google as the identity provider and @gmail.com with GitHub as the identity provider?
We have the issuer URL.
Well, yeah. So we add the issuer URL, like that's the solution, but we haven't done it yet.
But I mean, we haven't done it yet.
Did someone already implement that?
The issuer is an extension on the X509.
I know, but like it exists. We just aren't asserting it like as part of a verification step. Like the only thing we are comparing is the email associated with the identity.
You're talking about the check email flag. Yeah. So yes. So we have check email, which is a misnomer too, because it's not always an email. Sometimes it's URL. It's probably subject or something is probably more appropriate there. But yeah, so I mean, part of the desire to add that issuer was when we're supporting things like Kubernetes OIDC, right? The issuer varies more than the
more important.
And like we can't like support it a priori. You have to explicitly say you support the OIDC provider of your own cluster.
Why do I necessarily want to say that?
Well, so for the
things like build and attestations on my
Yes.
sort of production runtime cluster, I may have a production build cluster where I trust that OIDC verifier or as OIDC reviewer.
Right. Well, we don't want to support like evil.oidc or oidc.evil.com as an identity provider like out of the box, right? So it's like if you want to support oidc.evil.com, then you have to say like, okay, I support evil as an identity provider, and then you can also be like asserting, okay, this is signed by.
There's also two orthogonal sets, right? There's who can sign against a full CO root, which is full CO configuration, right?
Yes.
And then and there's some set of issuers that it will verify against. And then there's
So the public root will only support like GitHub, Google, Microsoft, etc.
Yeah, so for the issuer too, though, there have been requests already to kind of have more flexibility, right? So not to match it exactly, but to match it with wildcards, things like that. So I think even there seems like it's valid that that is not verified really in the guts of Cosigned, but if you're moving to this pluggable scheme, it's verified by something upper level which can vary that behavior based on the user specification of and or etc. Right?
Right. So I think in the world that we're trying to move towards, there's going to be some sort. There's Jake's building right now a sort of signer interface that can sign and then maybe do some fancier signing things right on top of it. But the same for verification, right? Exactly what we were talking about before.
Right.
There's some sort of to walk through the keyless case, right? There's verifying actual signing against the root. There's verifying things like the I guess the verification happens when you're actually signing, so it's a weird inversion. But there's a chain of verifications that happen. If you want to do things like check the transparency logs, that's a verification you can compose with some of these pieces. But yeah, I think that being able to layer additional verification on top of and compose with some baseline verification and layer your own verification on top of those things. Through the SDK, I think we'll definitely want folks to be able to do that. I think the question is how much of that sort of manifests through the API without the API becoming completely unwieldy, right? So, I think it's totally fine for us to say, look, we will punt on certain things and like add them on as we think we can take them on, right? So for look at going back to something like the sort of qrego verification that's currently in the CLI, right? Like those sort of came later, and that's a step that sort of composes with once I have verified the signature of an I guess it's all a composition. There's verifying the signatures, then there's verifying signatures on attestations, and then there's sort of picking apart the attestations and doing deeper and deeper things, right? So I think we can layer this up, and at the SDK layer, the layering should happen through as much composition as we can, so that folks can do that in code, however they want.
Yeah. So the one question I have, which I don't know I guess what's the best way is there a minimum set that we absolutely want to enforce in Cosigned, or is it completely delegated to the plugin, right? So to say you can choose to accept this or not, or should there be some sort of base verification which everybody gets?
I mean, the base verification that everyone gets is just the signature itself.
But if it's an AND set, and if there's like N of M kind of signatures, how do you? Is that something that we always want to pass in, and then we have to just define the format for that? which is possible, right? And then the verification function itself verifies the signatures, and then everything else is, or should there be at least one signature that then, yeah, how do you decide in the API call, right?
Right. I mean, I think this ties into one of the issues that specifically N of M, right? Definitely ties into one of the issues that I had opened yesterday when I was playing with some of the Q stuff, because right now, you know, our verification path is very sort of singularly focused on a single attestation, right? And we sort of verify the signature on the attestation, and then we evaluate the policy on that single in toto statement, right? Whereas things like N of M, I potentially want to look at the full set of verified attestations, right? Filter it to the subset I care about, right? And then, you know, if, you know, say I have N human reviewers, right? Does that satisfy my threshold of how many of them that I want? You know, assuming they're authorized as well, which is another fun piece of it.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
So they,
and then that extends beyond the single attestation scope too, right? It really wants sort of the full set of attestations.
Yeah, so I can share, you know, in for attestation specifically, the way we address this in the Kyverno policy is we have a kind of construct called any or all. So you can say I have, you know, a certain set of conditions. I want all of these to match or any of these to match. One feature which is pending is to add a count onto the any, which would handle the N of M, right? To say I want at least three of these to match. That seems like it covers sort of all of those combinations, right? Because you could say this is a complete set of signatures or attestations. This is I want any one of these to match, or I want 5 of these to match out of the 10 or something like that.
well, that's handled one use case, right? Maybe you just want a specific keys to match, not just 2 or 3. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and then that would be through the AND or the all, right? So you would just say I want all 3 to match, right? And then the policy would make sure that all 3, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the sentiment that caused Dan to poke at Q and others to poke at Rego was that you know, effectively rather than trying to enumerate all these different ways of doing it and encode it into YAML, right? Giving folks the payload and, you know, a language to do this with was sort of the alternative there. So
Yeah, so this the other part of this you know is just using, again, in the JSON, it's using JSpath as the language to check for certain things, right? But I think regardless of the language, if we again structure this where if you want to implement this in Q, it's possible. If you implement it in using syntax like this, it's also allowed. But it's really then up to, you know, the verifier to determine are the attestations sufficient and do they match whatever the defined policy is.
Yes, I think that I you know, to my point before, I don't know that we need to sort of get into this quite yet, since this I think is layer 3+, right? I mean, I think once we get through signing and, you know, reach sort of attestations, and let's sort of layer our way up to it, I think. I mean, I think we'll want to capture the scenarios, but let's.
Yeah, I think like so it'd be, we want to get all of the cryptographic validations out of the way before we start actually interrogating the data.
Yeah. So I mean, to the this example, right? Like for keyless verification, what do we think the API shape we want to sort of propose is for verifying against the whole series?
So it'll be instead of keys, it'll be identities. It can be
then
whatever. It can be inside of identities. It can be a key. It can be a reference to a service account, email, or the root. I think. I guess by identities, at least to me, sounds like something that we can evolve into a more complex resource or struct. Then you can either define row keys, you can define other aspects as well. I don't know. What do you think?
You think it's something like this?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, or I wonder whether it may make sense in this case to have something that's more like identity pools.
And there's no reason for this to exist inside of a policy, right? This could be outside.
Well, yeah. So I mean, and that's the other thing that I think we should talk about with keys was, one of the things that we sort of said that we should deal with down here was things like key rotation. And I think what we talked about last time was that if we sort of support things like, object references to secrets or stuff like this, that would be sufficient.
Yeah, I think so.
So we do this sort of in the style of sort of local object references. This would be something like oops.
I mean, we could have things like this be, their own objects, like their own top-level objects that get composed in these policies.
Right.
So it's like you said, we could have an identity or an identity pool, or like pinned to a public key, and they would all like qualify some, verifier.
So let's see. So to take a page out of some of our duct typing stuff, we so all right. So we would have something like a resource for each of the kinds of identities we would deal with verifying, something like, kind, I don't know, public key, something like that, right? So for the top case, we have this, maybe the spec points to, the name of the secret, and then we need sort of a common shape that these emit for verification, right? So we would do something like, have something here that we could extract from all of the different versions. You talking about something like this, Jake?
Yeah.
So are folks familiar with the sort of duct typing stuff that we've done in other contexts for sort of control plane composition? I can give an example that we have just beaten to death in the context of like Knative and other places. So we gave some talks on this at KubeCon as well. So one of the things we do for composition of API resources in Knative was we have this idea of sort of duct typing resources where, depending on API version and kind, you can sort of access that type and extract information for it without having full schema. So we have a duct type called addressable, where we have something like this, and this gives you an endpoint, right? And it doesn't matter what the rest of this object is, I can extract this partial schema from API resources and use that to do use this in the case of Knative to deliver HTTP requests, right? So I can deliver cloud events to this endpoint. And so we have this wrapped in many, many, many different contexts. All of those sort of emit this sort of normalized thing that we can then use for verification or for delivering things. So I think the idea here is, what would this be if we wanted to extract it in order to do verification? Then we could have something like, okay, I don't love the name, but okay, so we have full CO endpoint. Issuer, right? Let's see, subjects, something like this, right? Right.
Yeah, one question on that. Is it a somewhat safe assumption to kind of go with OIDC as the underlying, or do we want to kind of abstract away or have some layer which assumes it could be OIDC is used underneath or something else in the future?
I think we should make it OIDC simply because that's what we're going all in on OIDC. So it's like,
okay.
Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say OIDC feels like a relatively safe bet the way things are trending. But if there are alternative standards that folks think we would need to support or would want to support, I think there's sort of some legacy with things like SAML and whatnot that folks will want support for, but I think that OIDC tends to be the way things are trending. At least that's the way it looks to me right now. Maybe I have a very sort of, narrow perspective on it. So if there are other things that folks think are sort of critical to support, I'd be curious to hear what.
And also, do we need to support them in Cosigned, or do we just need to support them in terms of like flexibility in SDK?
Right, because OIDC is really currently used when signing, but for verification, we're just getting the data back from the OCI registry, right? There's no coupling to OIDC there.
Well, so I would say we assume OIDC. I mean, it's theoretically possible there could be some other type of provider that kind of looks like OIDC, but I think that would be dangerous because maybe we're not verifying the correct information to validate an identity of this other type.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the use case that comes to mind is today, like we're verifying with one email. But if we want to change that to say, well, it's this anybody, any identity from this group or from with this role, that's where, like, again, OIDC claims sort of come into play. If we can assume OIDC, then we could maybe kind of pick the terms and things which would be familiar to folks using OIDC as part of the verification itself, right? So, but it's flexible, so they might have their own custom scope and claims, which we can't then pick a name for it, right? Because it could be anything really.
We also might need HSM for, I don't know, this is a different use case, but I am not sure it will be
I mean, we
use it that much.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that's one of the things about
public
hopefully this kind of extensibility is it lets, I mean, so part of the point of some of the duct typing based extensibility that we did was we didn't want to have to bake in ahead of time knowledge of the things that would plug in. as long as they adhered to our duct type, we could sort of extract the information we need. So that would let you basically implement this interface entirely within your data center. That code may never leave your data center, right? But it can sort of interoperate with some of these pieces. So
Yep.
It would let you do, not just HSM, but really whatever.
Yeah.
I think one thing I'd caution if we want to sort of have an explosion of resources where, there's more than a handful of resources, it'll be a lot for folks to wrap their head around.
Definitely. Yeah, no, definitely.
And so I'm a big fan of sort of graduating complexity. And so like, as you need to know more, you learn more, but like starting out, it's as sort of simple as possible. I think an exception to that is where we can sort of bias toward precedents that they may already have a relatively good understanding of. So one that I was sort of noodling on a little bit, if we go with sort of multi-resource approach, is thinking about parallels to things like Kubernetes RBAC and cluster roles, cluster role bindings, and trying to formulate it in terms of things that will be very familiar to folks. Since if they're configuring these kinds of policies, they very likely have been involved in configuring things like Kubernetes RBAC.
Yeah.
And so leveraging sort of parallels to existing idioms they are likely familiar with is another way of helping us sort of bootstrap there. And so, yeah, those are, well, we're running low on time, but those are some things I think we should think about a bit. I don't know that we got completely to the bottom of sort of how we wanted to model even just signature verification for keyless. And I don't know how folks are leaning with respect to sort of doing it all in a single policy object versus trying to decompose it into multiple objects. But
like, how about if we, your homework for, winter break is to noodle on what a trusted signer looks like, this duct type of an identity that we trust to sign something. Is it a public key? Is it a OIDC identity, et cetera, et cetera? Do we want to be able to combine all of the above at the same time? So just like sort of noodle on what you think, this would look like, and the policy engine that would use them. So it's like if your engine had to take a generic trusted signer, how would you make it work?
Yep, makes sense. I mean, considering the complexity, at least from my point of view, it makes sense to have multiple type of resources, because otherwise the policy will become unmanageable probably.
Okay, I mean, I think that will also help with more complex policies as well, right? Because if the same sort of identity pool might be used across multiple contexts, it might be useful to be able to share that without repeating it in every context as well. But I think it'll be hard to really know how I feel until I see some like sample YAML. And I'm big on like sort of seeing what we think hypothetically would work, and trying to use it to like write up what some real policies might look like in terms of that sort of schema. And I think that'll help, when we go back to the broader group and we want to talk through these things, I think being able to speak to specific scenarios in terms of examples, I think will be very helpful. Okay, so I guess parting question. We'd said this is sort of the last meeting of the year last time. If folks want to sort of kick back off on the Monday after New Year's, wait for Friday, I could go either way. I may need a reminder of who you all are on Monday, but by Friday I'll be.
That's gonna be a fun holiday party there, Matt. Then I would vote for Friday if we can, because Monday will be slammed.
Yeah, Monday we're off, so I'd also prefer the 7th.
Okay, let's plan on resuming the Friday after New Year's then, or well, yeah, I think New Year's is the Saturday. So Friday after New Year's, and everyone have a great break. If you have time to noodle on some of the duct typing stuff, would it be useful to send around a couple of the talks we gave at KubeCon about this? I promise there are people in costumes in both. So
we can ask Evan. Evan to give.
Oh yeah, I'm sure Evan has them handy. Probably his dartboard. Us with yeah. Okay. Well, have a good holiday, and I'll see all of you in the new year.
Happy
Yeah,
holidays.
enjoy. Happy holidays. Bye-bye. Take care.
Take care. Bye.